Now that we have seen one way to use compute relative, I'm going to show you a few other ways that folks have used compute relative in creative ways. One way was used to filter duplicate records. So in this exercise, what we are going to do is take the same data set, but we are going to assume we only want the most recent opportunity name, stage, and amount, or just the last record. So again, we are going to use that same data set, add another compute relative node, switch a little bit the order, and specify how we are going to get a flag to determine that is the record, that is the last record that we need. So if you remember, this is our loading the advanced CSV dataset. We added previous fields in this node and registered. Now, you can edge mart it again, but since it's already here, maybe it's better just to reuse this edge mart node. It's already, the dataset is loaded. So I'm going to add another compute relative in a new stream right here. So again, compute relative, adding dupe flag. And the source is load the same data set. Again, partition by op name and order by date. However, I want the last record, and I don't have in my compute relative the offsets that I have. I don't have last because I only have first, previous, current, and next. So I'm going to switch the order to descending. So my first is actually my last, my latest. And again, if we go back to the spreadsheet, what I'm trying to do right now is get the previous name, for example. This is a new field I'm going to get. So let me show you how that is being done. Again, partition by same opportunity, by snapshot date. This time it's descending, and then I add a field. Now this field is just dupe flag, for example. Now remember this, you are going to need to know exactly how it's written, lowercase, no space, later on for the filter node that we are going to add. So this dupe flag expression, it's actually a source field. What am I trying to do is just what was the last name? What was the previous name? And current, and I'm looking at the previous. So what was the previous name of each record I'm looking at? And default value, for example, let's say NA. And hit save. So again, I'm looking at previous opportunity name, creating it as dupe flag. So if let me hit save and hit create here. This is my new node. Now, if I go back to my Excel sheet, what I'm trying to do is creating this thing called dupe flag. Now, these are going to switch. So just for brevity, I'm going to switch them briefly because I just switched the order. Okay, because we just reordered by descending. So now this is how my records look. So the dupe flag is the previous name. The previous name for this is nothing and replaced by NA. The previous name for this record is 01. So this is 01. These are the same, 01, 01. Then again, for this record, the previous name is nothing, null, replaced by NA. The second one is 02, 02, 02. So now I have this new field dupe flag where the latest record is always has this dupe flag equal NA, and any not latest record will have 01, 01, 01. So this is what I need, NA, NA on the latest record. And this is what this compute relative node is doing. Now that I have that flag, I can add a filter node. So the filter node, I'm going to add it next to this stream right here, or this node. So filter dupe flag, for example, and the source is adding dupe flag, and the filter here is a specific context, specific syntax, and I encourage you to go and read the manuals and just take a look how that is determined. But it's simply put, what was my field name? It was DUP flag, small letters. You have a colon, EQ, colon, and then exactly how the value was. N/A, if we had used a space, you just put NA, So again, there's no single quotes here, but just equal NA. Hit create. This is my new filter. And now I can register this. So I can register this. Register cleaned final DS, for example. The source is the filter. This is the alias, the API name of the created dataset, final dataset, and this is the name. I hit create, and now I have another registered node. Let's update the data flow. Let's run it. And this, in this case, let's run this. Let it run a little bit, and let's go verify how my data is behaving. By the way, when you are in Jobs Monitor, you can actually hit the plus, and once this is done, you can have some, for example, this was already done, you can have some idea of what was happening, what are the different nodes, etc., etc. Again, this is done right now. Let me go back to my Analytics Studio and verify a few things. First, let me look for final DS. This is the one with the arrows, the compute relative. If I go directly to values table, notice how I have no change, and I have the arrow showing right here, the way we did it in the cycle expression, and I have the rest of the other fields. And if I look at clean, so again, this was many rows repeating. If I go at the cleaned final data set, just one row per month. If I take a look at values table, and again, I only got the latest, which was the 6666. So these are a few ways how to use compute relative. Keep that in mind as you start using Dataflow and creatively trying to use or solve for your use cases. Let's take a look at the append transformation. Now, a very common use case or ask is creating a data set about activities. And that pretty much involves digesting or reading tasks, reading events. Those are two objects. And then using compute expression to add some fields to tasks and events so that when we append them together, we get the activities data set. Now, this is one of those cases where I'm going to say it's best to go back to your data flows. And if you had installed Sales app, you are going to see those nodes exactly written, and you can use them as a blueprint to create your own activities data set. Or if you have installed it and using that app, you can always use that data set, just the outcome. If you click on the data flow of a Sales app that you have installed, you're going to see a lot of nodes. But to go and find event, for example, just type event and you will see extract event. Zoom a little bit in. That's extract event. So these are the nodes, as you can see on the screen, where we are reading event, reading task, adding some fields to event. So you can take a look at this. Notice it's merged. These are the fields that are being added. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to cancel. Zoom back in. Same way, extract task, we are adding some more fields, and then this is where we append both together. This is the main part of getting the activities data set. Now, of course, if you track this down, there's adding the, if I remember correctly, it's the owner or the user ID, and then you use that to augment to the opportunities if you want to add activities to opportunities or to the account data set or the user's data set, etc. But the main part is these 5 nodes: extract event, extract task, add fields to event, add to task, and then append. So keep that in mind anytime you hit the requirement to add or create activities data set. Absolutely go and create the Sales app. And even if you're not going to use it, just go and look at the data flow. And if you want the actual nodes, there's one way to preview the JSON here and search for those nodes and take a look at the fields that are being created. Another use case you can cover using the data flow is taking a manual snapshot of a data set. Now, I do need to remind you before going through this exercise, this is how we used to do it before the snapshotting app was put out. And that is one of the reasons why, again, the templated apps are very important, because they take away a lot of the complexity of doing stuff at the data layer, for example, or through the data flows. Now, this is not that complex. It's just to understand the logical idea of how you are arranging your steps or how you are going about registering the first data set and then appending the snapshot on a daily basis. So these are the instructions. Again, you can pause the screen, take a look at them, or you can just let's go jump into the exercise. And for this exercise, I'm going to do a specific data flow. Why? Because this will be my snapshotting data flow. So I need to schedule it either on a daily or a weekly basis, one time or monthly basis. And I don't want it to interact with the multiple runs of a data set per day. So for example, if I create that data flow and say this is the manual snapshotting. Now the way this goes is, for example, first I need a first run of the data set. So let's say I'm going to use or edge mart one of the existing data sets. Let's say it's the so load DS1. I'm gonna call it DS1 or DS daily, let's say. So let's just use one of the, I mean, it could be anything actually. It could be cases or the objects, but I just want to choose something that's actually small, or let's go with my ops DS. That's fine. So this was created, it is created in Dataflow. The data flow that creates my ops DS could be running 3-4 times a day, okay? And that's why we're doing this separate data flow. But I'm gonna read this data set. The first time I do this, I'm gonna do this again, this data flow one time manually, load the data, the DS daily, then directly, let's zoom in, directly register it. So register DS total, for example, or trended. And the source node is the load, and the alias is like this, same name. So what I'm doing is just loading the data set that I want to snapshot, and immediately register it. So I get the DS trended. So let's say DS daily has 700 rows. Right now this will have 700 rows. I'll update the data flow. I will run the data flow because I do need that DS total or DS trended. I'll wait for it to run. And actually, meanwhile, I can also just go back to the data. So let's say it ran. So what I'm going to do is, now that it ran and registered DS trended, we are going to add an edge mart load DS trended, because now it exists. And let's see actually if it's done. Yep, right there, it's trended right here. So it was done, created. Now that this was created before, I can load it, and I will modify the nodes a little bit. I'm going to add an append. So append daily to trended, for example. And the sources are load daily and load DS trended. Create. And remember, I can do this reroute once I get the arrow. And now what's happening is I can load this on a daily basis, load the trended, append them, and register. This is the final step. Is you want to update the data flow, but you're not going to run it immediately, because this is the data flow you are going to schedule based on the trended schedule that you want. So if you want this on a daily basis, you will go back and schedule this, I'll show you in a bit, on a daily or a weekly or a month. This way it doesn't matter. This runs 4 times a day, but this DS daily from my ops data set, from that default data flow, runs 4 times a day, but we always pick the last one or whichever one when this data flow itself runs. So again, first time I had 700, registered as 700. Now when it runs tomorrow, this was 700 and this might be 1000, so now I have 1700. And then the day after, this is 1700 plus whatever, 800, so now I have 2500, and so on. So again, since I updated this, I'm not going to run it. The final step would be to go to the Dataflow, manual snapshotting, and scheduling it when you want to. And that's how you do manual snapshotting. But again, as a reminder, do not forget, you have an easier way to go through create app for template, go to snapshotting app, and you can use that same thing. It will create its own data flow. Another powerful transformation in Dataflow is the flatten transformation. The flatten transformation is very important when you're dealing with hierarchies. One very common exercise or use case is getting the user role so that you can add it to security predicates. This slide walks you through the steps to create the user role, to use a flatten on the user role object and get that flattened structure, and then augmenting it with any data set that has the IDs, in this case, the user ID. So the flatten node takes specific fields. You can fill them out, for example. And another 2 points on this is definitely the sales app. The sales app has that user role, so you can always take a look at it. I'll guide you to it in a bit. But to explain what flatten is essentially doing, let's take a look at this rough sketch that I did on a piece of paper. If you look at the top left corner, let me see if I can zoom in. Yep. So this is a typical hierarchy. Let's say I have M on top, and I have P rolling up to M, V rolling up to M, Z reports or rolls up to V, and A reports up to V. Now again, this doesn't have to be just hierarchies of roles. It could be parent accounts, parent products, etc. Anything that's a child-parent relation. Now, if you look at a table that presents this hierarchy, you will see something like this. M reports to nothing, and P rolls up to M, V rolls up to M, V rolls up to M, Z rolls up to V, and A reports back to V. So this is the table. As you can see, this is still table. Now when we digested it, for example, just as the object itself, when we apply flatten, what happens is we are creating a new data set, or this structure at least, with a new field that you can call it flatten or the path. And what it's doing is adding the path next to each of these IDs. So if I take a look at M, M reports no one but M. So now I have this new field here. M rolls up to M. If I take P, P rolls up to P itself and M. If I take a look at V, the same thing, V and M. If I take a look at Z, Z reports to V, V reports to M, and M reports to M. So Z reports to Z, V, and M. Notice this purple line. A reports to V. If you go up, V reports to M. And if you go up, M reports to no one. This is what we call the path, the going up hierarchy. What we're doing is kind of flattening it. So just imagine for a brief moment, we're going up like a ladder and then flattening the ladder horizontally. You get A, V, M. And that's why pretty much it's flattened. Now this by itself, standing alone, doesn't do anything. What we need to do is add it, augment it to the other data sets. For example, this data set, the one we created up on our account, it had those Z and V and A and P. So we add them based on those fields, based on this field right here, mapping to the field right here, so that when we look at it down, our new data set has a new field right here. This is something I added to all the records next to each other. Now there's a reason. Again, once we go to the security chapter, you're going to see now that now, for example, let me walk you through the example. In the previous data set right here, if I said I want the users to see the records they own or whoever rolls up to them. So for example, if M runs a dashboard or looks at this data set, M does not own any record, so they won't be able to see nothing. But once I add this path in this new data set, if M logs in, although M does not own anything here, but this new field that we added from the flatten allows M to see all the fields because everybody rolls up to M and M exists in all these values right here. Again, we'll go over this in security chapter, but this is pretty much one of the powerful things in the flatten transformation. So let's go to the data manager and take a look at the sales app again. It's a good blueprint for that. If you go to the flatten, you're going to find flatten user role. That's a node right here. Reading user role, flatten user role. If you take a look at it, these are the fields. Please take a look at them. Where's the parent? What's the multi-field? What's the role path? And what's the output fields? So you can go back to the slides, and this is listed here. Now, one particular thing about flatten, and specifically for the role path, the roles and role path, these fields by default are is system field true, so they are hidden from the UI. You can see them in the data flow, but you cannot see them in the UI when you are exploring or creating steps in the dashboard. If for a reason you want to change these to be able to be seen in the UI, you need to add a schema section. Now this brings us to the schema section. Schema section is something you can add manually right now under any of the nodes in the data flow and override some of the schema things. If you remember from the CSV upload, I mentioned something about the schema file there too. That's very similar, what it does to the fields. And if you want to take a look at it, again, this is the data flow. These three buttons are important. This one gives you a preview of the JSON. You can search for schema, for example. It's used in a few times right here. And this is where we are adding a schema section to this flatten node just to add what we want to override the schema. Going to zoom out. A tip that probably I'm not sure if I mentioned before is always, when you are editing data flows or before even touching the data flows, always make sure you download the JSON here so you have a backup copy. So if you mess something or you're touching a production one, or again, for some reason, you do have that backup that you can always upload again, the default one. Another node in Dataflow Editor is the filter node. Now the filter node, we saw that in the previous exercise where we used something similar to dup flag equal NA. So again, the filter node is simply something you drag and drop in the Dataflow Editor and you add it after the node that you want to filter the data. Now, a tip on the filter node itself. Let's go back to the Dataflow Editor and notice again, for example, in the previous exercise called Advanced DF Exercises, we added the filter node right here. Now, this is important to note that, again, you drag and drop the node, you create the filter node and add it where you want. In other data flows, for example, the default Salesforce data flow, where we added the opportunity object, SFDC digest. On the SFDC digest, there's actually a placeholder right here for filter conditions. Now, for filter conditions, it's not recommended to add these to the digest node. The reason why is if you add some filter condition right here to this particular opportunity, saying, for example, my ops data set, I only want it to be this year or for a certain region or certain industry. But in this data flow, you also have another digest for someone else was creating data set or for some other reason. This data set needs to include all the fields. So if you put the filter on the digest node, what happens to the sync object right here on the opportunity is going to take that particular filter and filter out everything else being called from it. So again, if you go here and you don't add a filter here, but you added the filter on the digest node here, it's as if you have manually put it on all the digest nodes. So take note of that, and that's why you should use the filter nodes at this stage. If you need to, remember, if you need to filter at the source, you can go to the sync object and add the filter right there. One more thing, since I clicked on the digest node, notice that this is where you add the fields. So again, if I click on the SFDC digest node, if I forgot a field, This is where I go to select fields and I add the field that I have missed. Another tip, if I have close date, you can click on this. This is where you specify a default value, or more importantly, you can set the fiscal month offset. So if it's offset by a month, you can set the fiscal month offset here. And let's do this, for example, or +1. And you're going to see now the new menu updated in the UI. Also, for dimensions, it's highly recommended always to come here and add the default value NA. You don't want dimensions that are null. They can mess up the group in the UI. You might not see that on the bar chart. So it's always highly recommended to add an NA right here for the default value. And if it's a multi-value, we talk about this in another slide. This is where you set it up as a multi-value and what's the separator. So again, these are all in the SFDC digest right here. Since I changed a field, it's going to propagate, yes, take all of my changes from here all the way down. I'm going to update the data flow to show you later those changes. Now with filter nodes, there are some common topics in the product. One of them is dealing with different data grains. I highly recommend checking our Trailblazer MVP Peter Lyons. He has a Let's Play Salesforce YouTube channel. You can check that out. He has tackled those under the advanced data flow topics. But also keep a close eye on the summer release, Safe Harbor. We're going to have some new features in the data prep and the recipes that will help us deal with the different data grains. Another point, we used to get some use cases about using static date data sets. So for example, I want the complete dates for the last 5 years and the future 10 years, or last 10 years and future 20 years. You could actually create a CSV file and import it as a data set and use that as a full dates, and then left augment all of your data sets that you want to fill the gaps in the dates to this data set. Again, it's one approach. Keep an eye, there's also a fill dates in the cycle. You can solve it on the designer layer, but at the data layer, this approach can still be valid. It's all the way back from the data warehouse dates. Other notes, again, keep in mind compute relative is very good to get the last of something, or first of something, or last activity, last amount or change. Use the filter nodes. Keep in mind filter nodes are again good to add that node within the flow versus on the SFDC digest node. And also you can use a combination of compute expressions and filter node to do what you want to solve the use cases you might be tackling. 3 best practice tips to remember always. So always combine data sets in the data layer. It helps you. It reduces the dependency on cycle. We will later see in the cycle chapter why that's important. So again, try to combine data sets. It is still okay to have multiple data sets in the dashboard, but again, it's also good to spend some time on combining them if we can. Add the right fields in the data layer. That is very important, whether through recipes or the compute expressions, compute relatives. And always add the common lookup fields when you're creating multiple data sets so that you can use the connect data sources in the dashboard UI easily. For further reading, keep always an eye on this link. And again, this was it's available in the learning map and the different resources, but you do want the analytics data integration guide, the PDF version. Always, every release, download the PDF, keep it on your laptop. You can easily search and find topics and much more, again, along things that we have touched during this chapter.